Marcus Rodriguez had always believed that some people were born to save others. As a paramedic in downtown Chicago, he saw the worst of humanity every day, but he also witnessed incredible acts of courage that reminded him why he chose this profession. At 32, Marcus had responded to countless emergencies, from heart attacks in high-rise apartments to car crashes on busy highways. But nothing in his 10-year career had prepared him for what would happen on that cold February morning. The call came in at 6:47 a.m. A construction accident at a downtown building site had left multiple workers trapped under collapsed scaffolding. Marcus grabbed his medical kit and rushed to the ambulance with his partner, Sarah Chen, a veteran paramedic who had taught him everything he knew about emergency medicine. The radio crackled with updates as they weaved through early morning traffic, sirens blaring. When they arrived at the scene, chaos greeted them. Orange safety cones blocked off the street, and construction workers stood in clusters, their faces pale with shock. The building's metal scaffolding had collapsed during the night shift, creating a twisted maze of steel beams and concrete chunks. Somewhere beneath that debris, 3 men were trapped. Fire Captain Williams approached Marcus and Sarah as they unloaded their equipment. His face was grim, marked by years of seeing tragedies unfold. He pointed toward the largest pile of rubble near the building's east side. "We've got voice contact with 2 of them," Captain Williams explained, his breath visible in the cold air. "But there's a 3rd guy deeper in. Construction foreman says he's former military, goes by Jake. Haven't heard from him in over an hour." Marcus nodded, his training kicking in automatically. He had learned early in his career that in emergency situations, emotions had to take a back seat to action. Every second counted when lives hung in the balance. The rescue operation began immediately. Specialized equipment arrived, including hydraulic jacks and cutting tools designed to move heavy debris safely. Marcus watched as firefighters carefully lifted steel beams, creating small openings where rescuers could assess the situation. The 2 workers who had been making noise were located within the first hour. Both had serious injuries but were conscious and able to communicate. As Marcus treated the first rescued worker for a broken leg and possible internal bleeding, he couldn't stop thinking about the 3rd man, Jake. Something about the situation bothered him. Why had Jake gone silent? In his experience, trapped victims either called for help continuously or had lost consciousness from their injuries. The silence usually meant the worst. After the first 2, workers were loaded into ambulances and rushed to the hospital. Marcus approached Captain Williams again. The rescue teams were discussing how to reach the area where Jake was believed to be trapped. The collapsed scaffolding had created a dangerous overhang of concrete and steel that threatened to collapse further with any disturbance. "It's too risky," one of the structural engineers was saying. "If we try to move those support beams, the whole section could come down. We need to wait for the heavy equipment to arrive and approach this from the other side." Marcus understood the logic, but something in his gut told him that waiting meant Jake would die. He had seen enough accident victims to recognize when time was running out. The longer someone remained trapped, especially without responding, the lower their chances of survival became. "How long until the heavy equipment gets here?" Marcus asked. Captain Williams checked his watch. "At least 2 hours, maybe 3 with this morning traffic." 3 hours. Marcus knew that if Jake was alive but injured, 3 hours might be too long. He looked at the twisted metal and concrete, trying to visualize a path that wouldn't trigger another collapse. His eyes caught something that the others had missed. There was a small gap between 2 fallen beams, barely wide enough for a person to crawl through. It led toward the area where Jake was supposed to be. The opening was risky and would require someone to navigate through unstable debris, but it was possible. "I think I can get through there," Marcus said, pointing to the gap. Sarah grabbed his arm immediately. "Marcus, no, that's not our job. Let the rescue specialist handle this." But Marcus had already made his decision. Throughout his career, he had always followed protocols and waited for the right equipment and specialists. This time felt different. Something told him that Jake needed help now, not in 3 hours. "I'm going in," he announced to Captain Williams. The fire captain shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. You're not trained for technical rescue operations. If something goes wrong, we'll have 2 people trapped instead of 1. Marcus appreciated the concern, but his mind was already working through the logistics. He was smaller than most of the firefighters, which would make it easier to navigate the tight spaces. He had medical training that could keep Jake alive if he was found injured. Most importantly, he had a feeling that waiting would mean losing someone who could still be saved. Despite the protests from his colleagues, Marcus began preparing his equipment. He stripped down to essential items: a small medical kit, a flashlight, rope, and a radio. Every ounce mattered when squeezing through tight spaces. As he approached the gap in the debris, Sarah made one last attempt to stop him. "Marcus, please think about this. You have a family to go home to." Marcus paused for a moment, thinking about his wife Elena and their 5-year-old daughter Sophia. Elena had always worried about his job, knowing that paramedics sometimes put themselves in danger to help others. But she also understood that helping people was who Marcus was at his core. "If that was me trapped in there," Marcus said quietly, "I'd want someone to try." With those words, he dropped to his hands and knees and began crawling into the dark, unstable tunnel of debris, not knowing that this decision would change his life forever. The darkness inside the collapsed scaffolding was complete. Marcus crawled forward slowly, using his flashlight to illuminate the path ahead. The space was tighter than he had anticipated, forcing him to move on his belly in some sections. Sharp edges of broken concrete scraped against his back, and the smell of dust and diesel fuel filled his nostrils. Above him, the twisted metal beams groaned ominously with every movement he made. Marcus knew that the entire structure was unstable, held together by nothing more than the weight distribution of the debris. One wrong move could bring everything crashing down. His radio crackled softly. "Marcus, status report," came Sarah's voice tight with worry. "I'm about 20 feet in," he whispered back, not wanting to speak too loudly and risk triggering a collapse. "The pathway is holding so far." As he continued forward, Marcus called out quietly for Jake. "Hello? Can you hear me?" "My name is Marcus. I'm a paramedic, and I'm here to help." Nothing but silence responded to his calls. The tunnel began to angle downward, and Marcus realized he was moving deeper beneath the collapsed structure. His flashlight beam revealed that the debris had created a small pocket ahead, giving him hope that Jake might have found an airspace to survive in. After 30 minutes of careful crawling, Marcus heard something that made his heart race. A faint moan came from somewhere ahead. "Jake was alive! Jake! I can hear you." "Keep making noise so I can find you," Marcus called out, his voice echoing in the confined space. The moaning continued, guiding Marcus through the maze of debris. Finally, his flashlight illuminated a larger open area where Jake lay trapped beneath a heavy steel beam. The man was conscious but clearly in severe pain. Marcus quickly assessed the situation. Jake appeared to be in his late 20s, with the lean build and short haircut that suggested military background. A steel beam had pinned his left leg and blood had pooled beneath him. His face was pale, indicating possible shock from blood loss. "Hey Jake, I'm Marcus. I'm going to get you out of here," Marcus said, moving closer to examine the injuries. Jake's eyes focused on Marcus with effort. When he spoke, his voice was weak but clear. "You shouldn't have come in here. This whole thing is going to collapse." Marcus was already unpacking his medical supplies. He needed to stabilize Jake before attempting any rescue. The leg injury was serious, possibly requiring amputation if they didn't get Jake to a hospital soon. But the immediate concern was stopping the bleeding and treating for shock. "Let me worry about the structure," Marcus said, applying pressure bandages to the worst wounds. "You just focus on staying with me." As Marcus worked, Jake began talking, perhaps knowing he might not survive. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan with Delta Force," he said between labored breaths. "Saw a lot of guys get hurt, but I never thought I'd end up like this back home." Marcus continued his medical treatment while listening. He had tremendous respect for military personnel, knowing they risked their lives to protect others just as he did in his own way. "What's your full name?" Marcus asked, both to keep Jake conscious and to gather information for the medical report. "Jake Morrison. Sergeant Jake Morrison. Got out of the service 6 months ago. Been doing construction work while figuring out what comes next." Marcus finished stabilizing Jake's injuries as best he could with his limited supplies. Now came the difficult part, figuring out how to get Jake out from under the steel beam without causing further injury or triggering a collapse. The beam was too heavy for Marcus to lift alone, But he noticed that the debris had shifted in a way that might allow him to create leverage. Using a smaller steel rod as a fulcrum, Marcus began working to lift the beam just enough to pull Jake free. "This is going to hurt," Marcus warned. Positioning himself to pull Jake clear, Jake nodded, gripping Marcus's arm. "Do it." Marcus applied pressure to his makeshift lever. The beam shifted slightly, and Jake cried out in pain as Marcus quickly pulled him clear. But their movement had disturbed the delicate balance of the debris pile. Above them, a grinding sound filled the air as metal beams began to shift. Dust and small pieces of concrete started falling around them. "We need to move now," Marcus said, helping Jake sit up despite his injuries. But as they prepared to exit, a thunderous crack echoed through the space. One of the main support beams above them had snapped, and a massive section of the collapsed structure was beginning to fall. Marcus threw himself over Jake, trying to shield him from the falling debris. A large concrete chunk struck Marcus in the back, driving the air from his lungs. More debris rained down, trapping both men under a new layer of rubble. Marcus felt warm blood running down his face and realized he had been struck in the head. His vision began to blur, but he forced himself to stay conscious. He reached for his radio, hoping it still worked. "Sarah, collapse, both trapped," he managed to say into the radio before his strength began to fade. The radio crackled back with urgent voices, but Marcus could barely make out the words. He looked at Jake, who was unconscious again from the trauma of being moved and the new injuries from falling debris. Marcus tried to assess his own condition. His back was injured, possibly his spine. His head wound was bleeding heavily, and he felt the dangerous drowsiness that indicated a serious concussion. He was trapped under debris with limited air, and the rescue teams outside would now have an even more difficult task reaching them. Using his remaining strength, Marcus managed to position himself so that Jake had access to the small pocket of air they shared. If only one of them was going to survive until rescue arrived, Marcus was determined that it would be Jake. The soldier had already served his country and deserved a chance to figure out his post-military life. As Marcus began to lose consciousness, he thought about Elena and Sophia. He hoped they would understand why he had made this choice. Some people were born to save others, and this was simply who he was. The last thing Marcus remembered was Jake's hand weakly gripping his arm, a gesture of gratitude from one man who risked his life for others to another. Then darkness claimed him, and he didn't know if he would ever wake up again. Outside, the rescue operation transformed into a desperate race against time to save two heroes who had become victims of their own courage. The massive rescue operation that followed would be remembered as one of the most complex urban extractions in Chicago's history. When Marcus's radio transmission cut off after reporting the secondary collapse, Captain Williams immediately called for additional resources. Heavy equipment, structural engineers, and specialized rescue teams converged on the construction site within hours. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the debris field, her hands clenched in helpless fists as she watched the rescue teams work. She had been Marcus's partner for 3 years and knew him better than most. His decision to enter the unstable structure hadn't surprised her, but that didn't make watching any easier. The rescue operation required careful precision. Engineers used sensors to map the collapsed structure and identify where the two men might be located. Every movement had to be calculated to avoid causing another collapse that could kill Marcus and Jake instantly. 8 hours after the secondary collapse, rescue teams finally reached the pocket where Marcus and Jake were trapped. Both men were unconscious and barely breathing. Jake had lost a dangerous amount of blood from his leg injury, while Marcus showed signs of severe head trauma and possible spinal damage. The extraction process took another 4 hours. Medical teams worked frantically to stabilize both men as they were carefully removed from the debris. Marcus was rushed to Chicago General Hospital's trauma center, where Dr. Patricia Williams, one of the city's top neurosurgeons, took charge of his case. Elena Rodriguez received the phone call every emergency responder's family dreads. Sarah had volunteered to make the call, knowing that hearing the news from a stranger would be even worse. When Elena arrived at the hospital with 5-year-old Sophia, Marcus was already in surgery. "The next 24 hours will be critical," Dr. Williams explained to Elena in the family waiting room. "Marcus has sustained significant head trauma and possible spinal injuries. We're doing everything we can, but I need you to prepare for the possibility that even if he survives, He may not be the same person he was before. Elena nodded, though the words felt surreal. That morning, Marcus had kissed her goodbye and promised to be home for dinner. Now she sat in a hospital waiting room, wondering if he would ever come home at all. Jake Morrison was in equally critical condition 3 rooms down from Marcus. Military doctors from the nearest base had arrived to assist with his care, recognizing his service record and ensuring he received the best possible treatment. His leg injuries were severe, requiring multiple surgeries to save the limb. For 2 weeks, both men remained in intensive care. Marcus slipped in and out of consciousness, sometimes recognizing Elena and Sophia, other times staring blankly at the ceiling. The head trauma had caused swelling in his brain, and doctors weren't sure what permanent damage might result. Jake's recovery followed a different pattern. His physical injuries were healing, but he seemed withdrawn and unresponsive to visitors. The military doctors explained that he was likely experiencing survivor's guilt and possibly PTSD from both his military service and the construction accident. During the 3rd week, Marcus finally turned a corner. The brain swelling began to reduce and he started having longer periods of lucidity. His memory was spotty, but he remembered Elena and Sophia clearly, which doctors considered a positive sign. One afternoon, as Marcus was working with a physical therapist to regain his motor skills, Elena mentioned Jake Morrison. "The soldier you saved is down the hall," she said. "He's been asking about you." Marcus's eyes brightened with interest, though speaking still required significant effort. "Is he okay?" "He's going to keep his leg thanks to you getting him out when you did. The doctors say if you hadn't found him and started treatment, he would have bled to death." That evening, against medical advice, Marcus insisted on visiting Jake. Elena wheeled him down the hall to Jake's room, where they found the young veteran staring out the window at the city below. "Hey, Jake," Marcus said softly. Jake turned and his face lit up for the first time since the accident. "Marcus, man, I can't believe you're awake. I've been wanting to thank you." The 2 men talked for nearly an hour. Jake shared stories about his military service and his struggles adjusting to civilian life. Marcus talked about his work as a paramedic and his family. Despite their different backgrounds, they discovered a shared sense of purpose in helping others. "You know," Jake said as their conversation wound down, "I was pretty lost when I got out of the military. Didn't know what I was supposed to do with my life. Being trapped in that debris, thinking I was going to die, it made me realize something." Marcus listened intently, still struggling with occasional dizziness from his injuries. "I realized that I want to do what you do," Jake continued. "Help people who are in trouble. Maybe become a paramedic or a firefighter. Something where I can make a difference the way you made a difference for me." Marcus smiled, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went beyond his own recovery. "I think you'd be good at it." Over the following weeks, both men continued their recovery. Marcus gradually regained most of his cognitive functions, though he still experienced headaches and occasional memory gaps. Jake's leg healed enough for him to walk with minimal assistance, and his emotional state improved dramatically as he focused on his plans for emergency services training. 2 months after the accident, Marcus was cleared to return to light duty as a paramedic. Jake had enrolled in EMT training classes and visited Marcus regularly to learn about the profession. They had developed a friendship based on their shared experience and mutual respect, but their growing friendship was cut short in a way neither of them expected. Jake had been making excellent progress in his EMT training and seemed to have found his direction in life. He often talked about wanting to give back to the community, the way Marcus had given back to him. His instructors reported that he was one of the most dedicated students they had ever seen. Then, on a rainy Thursday morning in late spring, Jake Morrison was driving to his EMT training class when a drunk driver ran a red light and slammed into his car at 45 miles per hour. The impact was devastating. Jake was pronounced dead at the scene. Marcus learned about Jake's death when Sarah called him at home. He had been preparing to return to full duty the following week, excited about getting back to the work he loved. The news hit him like a physical blow. Elena found Marcus sitting in their living room staring at the wall with tears streaming down his face. It was the first time she had seen him cry since the accident. "He was going to be a paramedic," Marcus said quietly. "He was going to help people. It's not fair." The funeral was held at a military cemetery with full honors for Jake's service. Marcus served as one of the pallbearers, despite still dealing with his own physical limitations. As they lowered Jake's casket into the ground, Marcus felt like a part of himself was being buried as well. In the months that followed, Marcus threw himself back into his work with renewed dedication. But he never forgot Jake Morrison, the soldier he had saved, who had in turn saved Marcus's sense of purpose before being taken away far too soon. 6 months after Jake's funeral, Marcus had settled into a routine that felt almost normal. His headaches had become less frequent, and he had regained most of his physical strength. The scar across his forehead served as a daily reminder of the accident, but he had learned to view it as a symbol of survival rather than trauma. On a crisp October morning, Marcus was restocking the ambulance when his supervisor, Captain Rodriguez, approached with an unusual expression on his face. "Marcus, there's someone here to see you," the captain said. "Says it's about Jake Morrison." Marcus looked up, curious. Jake had been an only child, and his parents had moved to Florida after the funeral. Marcus couldn't imagine who would be asking about Jake after all this time. In the station's waiting area, Marcus found a woman in her 60s with graying hair and kind eyes. She was clutching a manila envelope in her hands and seemed nervous. "Mr. Rodriguez?" she asked, standing as he approached. "My name is Margaret Chen. I was Jake Morrison's landlord." Marcus shook her hand, wondering what this could be about. "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Chen. How can I help you?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she spoke. "I know this might seem strange, but I found something in Jake's apartment that I think you should have. I've been carrying it around for months, trying to decide what to do with it." She handed Marcus the envelope, which had his name written on it in Jake's distinctive handwriting. Marcus stared at the envelope, feeling a chill run down his spine. "Where did you find this?" he asked. "It was on his kitchen table, sealed and ready to be mailed," Margaret explained. "There was no stamp on it, and I wasn't sure if I should just throw it away or try to find you. Then I saw your name in the newspaper last week when they wrote that article about local heroes, and I knew I had to bring it to you." Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter 3 pages long, dated just 2 days before Jake's fatal accident. "Dear Marcus," the letter began, "I hope this letter finds you well and back to doing the work you love. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation in the hospital, and I wanted to share something with you that I couldn't say face to face." Marcus sat down heavily, his heart racing as he continued reading. "You saved my life in that collapsed building, but you did something even more important than that. You gave me a reason to live. Before the accident, I was struggling with the transition from military to civilian life. I felt lost and useless, like all my training and experience meant nothing in the regular world." The letter went on to describe Jake's feelings of displacement after leaving the military, his difficulty connecting with people who hadn't shared his experiences, and his growing depression in the months before the construction accident. "When I was trapped under that debris, I thought about giving up," Jake had written. "It would have been easy to just close my eyes and let go. But then you appeared, this stranger who was willing to risk his own life to save mine. You reminded me that there are still people in the world who care about others, even people they don't know." Marcus wiped his eyes, realizing that Margaret was still standing there, watching him read. "I'm sorry," he said. "This is just unexpected." Margaret nodded understandingly. "Take your time." Marcus continued reading, learning things about Jake that he had never known. The letter described Jake's childhood dreams of becoming a doctor, his decision to join the military after his father's death, and his uncertainty about what path to take as a civilian. "The EMT training you told me about gave me hope for the first time since I left the service," Jake had written. "I realized that I could use my experience to help people the way you helped me. I wanted to become someone who runs toward danger when others run away from it." The second page of the letter contained something that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. "I've been accepted into the paramedic training program at Chicago Community College. I start classes next month, and my goal is to eventually work for the Chicago Fire Department as an EMT. I want to follow in your footsteps and show other people the same kindness you showed me." Marcus realized that Jake had been planning to surprise him with this news. The letter was meant to be a thank you note and an announcement of Jake's acceptance into the paramedic program. The final page of the letter contained a request that left Marcus stunned. "If something ever happens to me, I want you to know that my life insurance policy lists you as the beneficiary. I don't have any family left, and I want the money to go to someone who understands the importance of helping others. I've also arranged for my savings account to be donated to the Chicago Fire Department's Emergency Response Fund. Marcus looked up at Margaret, who had been watching his reactions closely. There's more, she said quietly, reaching into her purse. The insurance company has been trying to reach you for months, but they had outdated contact information. Jake left instructions that if anything happened to him, they should find the paramedic who saved his life. She handed Marcus a business card from Mutual Life Insurance Company. The agent's name is David Walsh. He said the policy is worth $250,000. Marcus stared at the business card, unable to process what he was hearing. Jake had left him $250,000. Money that could change his family's life dramatically. I don't understand, Marcus said. Why would he do this? We barely knew each other. Margaret sat down beside him, her voice gentle but firm. From what I could see, Jake didn't have many close relationships. But he talked about you constantly after he got out of the hospital. You weren't just someone who saved his life. You were someone who showed him how to live it. That evening, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with Elena and Sophia, the letter spread out before them. Elena had read it twice, and Sophia was coloring quietly nearby, unaware of the magnitude of what had happened. He wanted to be like you, Elena said softly. He wanted to save people the way you saved him. Marcus nodded, still struggling to accept Jake's final gift. I feel like I should give the money back somehow. It doesn't feel right keeping it. Elena took his hand across the table. Jake made this decision when he was healthy and thinking clearly. He wanted you to have it because he knew you would use it to help others just like he planned to do. As Marcus looked at his wife and daughter, he began to understand Jake's reasoning. The money wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility. Jake had entrusted him with the resources to continue the work of helping others, even from beyond the grave. That night, as Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Jake's death, a sense of connection to his friend that transcended physical presence. Jake had found a way to return, not as a ghost or spirit, but as a continuing influence that would shape Marcus's ability to serve others for years to come. 3 days after receiving Jake's letter, Marcus found himself sitting across from David Walsh, the insurance agent, in a small office downtown. Walsh was a middle-aged man with a sympathetic demeanor who had clearly handled many difficult cases, involving beneficiaries who never expected to inherit anything. Mr. Morrison was very specific about his wishes, Walsh explained, sliding a thick folder across the desk. He updated his policy just 6 weeks before his death, changing the beneficiary from his parents to you. He also left detailed instructions about how he wanted the claim to be handled. Marcus opened the folder and found not just insurance documents, but a second letter from Jake, this one addressed to the insurance company, but meant for Marcus to read. To whom it may concern, the letter began. Marcus Rodriguez saved my life, but more importantly, he saved my purpose. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer alive to thank him properly. Please ensure that he understands this gift comes with no obligations except to continue being the person he already is. Walsh pointed to a specific clause in the insurance policy. Mr. Morrison also arranged for the payout to be structured in a way that would minimize tax implications for you. He clearly put a lot of thought into this. As Marcus reviewed the documents, Walsh shared more details about Jake's final arrangements. Your friend also established a scholarship fund at Chicago Community College for military veterans, pursuing emergency medical training. He funded it with his savings and arranged for it to be administered through the school's financial aid office. Marcus looked up in surprise. He never mentioned any of this. According to our records, he set up these arrangements over a period of several months, Walsh continued. He also contacted the Chicago Fire Department about donating his EMT training equipment to future students who couldn't afford their own supplies. The scope of Jake's planning began to dawn on Marcus. This wasn't a simple thank you gesture. It was a comprehensive plan to ensure that Jake's desire to help others would continue even after his death. Later that day, Marcus drove to Chicago Community College to learn more about the scholarship fund Jake had established. The financial aid director, Mrs. Patricia Gonzalez, welcomed him warmly and explained the details of what Jake had set up. The Jake Morrison Memorial Scholarship provides full tuition assistance for military veterans entering our EMT or paramedic training programs, she explained, leading Marcus through the department's offices. He funded it with $75,000 of his own money and arranged for it to be renewable annually. She showed Marcus a small plaque that had been installed in the EMT training classroom, honoring Jake's service and his commitment to emergency medical care. Below the plaque was a quote that Jake had requested. "Some people are born to save others." Marcus recognized the words immediately. They were from his own thoughts on the morning of the construction accident, words he had shared with Jake during one of their hospital conversations. He also arranged for something else, Mrs. Gonzalez continued, opening a cabinet and removing a brand new EMT medical kit. Mr. Morrison purchased 20 complete emergency medical kits for students who can't afford their own equipment. Each kit comes with a note explaining that it's a gift from someone who believed in the importance of helping others. Marcus examined the medical kit, recognizing the high-quality equipment that would cost several $100s for a student to purchase. Inside the kit was a small card with Jake's handwriting. "Use this to save lives. Pass on the kindness." Over the following weeks, Marcus began to understand the full extent of Jake's post-death planning. The young veteran had used his final months to create a legacy of helping others that would continue for years to come. At the fire station where Jake had been planning to apply for work, Captain Williams showed Marcus a letter that had arrived 3 days after Jake's death. "He wrote to us about his application," Captain Williams explained. "But he also included a donation to our emergency response fund and a request that we consider giving preference to other military veterans in our hiring process." The letter to the fire department included another surprise. Jake had researched the station's needs and discovered that they required updated cardiac monitoring equipment for their ambulances. His donation was specifically designated to purchase new heart monitors that could save lives in emergency situations. "He never even worked here," Captain Williams said, shaking his head in amazement. "But he wanted to make sure we had the best equipment possible to help people." Marcus also learned that Jake had contacted the construction company where the accident occurred. Instead of filing a lawsuit, which would have been his right, Jake had written to the company's safety director with suggestions for improving worker protection protocols. He sent us a detailed analysis of what went wrong and recommendations for preventing similar accidents, the safety director explained during a phone call with Marcus. "We've implemented every single one of his suggestions." His input probably saved other workers from getting hurt. As these revelations continued to emerge, Marcus realized that Jake had spent his final months creating a comprehensive plan to help others long after his own death. Every aspect of his life, his money, his knowledge, his experience, had been carefully directed toward making the world a little bit safer for other people. The most profound discovery came when Marcus visited Jake's former apartment building to thank Margaret Chen for bringing him the letter. Margaret invited him inside and showed him Jake's apartment, which she had kept largely unchanged. "I probably should have rented it out by now," she admitted, "but something about this place feels special. I wanted to make sure I had found everyone he meant to help before I cleared it out." In Jake's bedroom, Marcus found a journal that Jake had been keeping since his discharge from the military. The entries revealed the depth of Jake's struggles with civilian life, but also his gradual transformation after meeting Marcus. "Marcus showed me that heroism isn't about combat or military service." One entry read, "It's about being willing to help someone when they need it most, even if you don't know them and even if it costs you something." Another entry, dated just 1 week before the car accident, read, "I finally understand what I'm supposed to do with my life. I'm supposed to be like Marcus, someone who runs toward trouble when other people run away from it. If I can't do it myself anymore, at least I can make sure other people have the resources to do it." The final entry in the journal was dated the day before Jake's death. "I've done everything I can think of to make sure my death will create more help than my life alone could have provided. If something happens to me tomorrow, I know that Marcus and others will continue the work. That's enough." Reading these words, Marcus finally understood the true scope of what Jake had done. The young veteran had transformed his own mortality into a force for helping others, using his death as a catalyst to create more good in the world than he could have accomplished in a lifetime. As Marcus sat in Jake's empty apartment, Surrounded by the evidence of his friend's extraordinary planning, he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility he had inherited. Jake hadn't just left him money. He had left him a mission to ensure that the spirit of helping others would continue to grow and spread. For the first time since Jake's death, Marcus smiled, realizing that his friend had indeed found a way to return, not as a ghost or spirit, but as a living force for good that would continue to touch lives for years to come. 1 year after Jake's death, Marcus stood in front of the newly constructed Jake Morrison Emergency Training Center, a state-of-the-art facility that had been built with the insurance money Jake had left him. The building housed realistic training scenarios for EMTs, paramedics, and firefighters. Complete with mock disaster sites and cutting-edge medical simulation equipment. Elena squeezed his hand as they watched the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Sophia, now 6 years old, held a small bouquet of flowers that she planned to place at the memorial garden they had created behind the building. Jake would have loved this, Elena said softly, watching as the first class of scholarship recipients prepared to begin their training inside the facility. Marcus nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that had taken months to develop. Initially, he had struggled with guilt about using Jake's money, feeling unworthy of such an extraordinary gift. But gradually, he had come to understand that Jake's true intention was not to reward him personally, but to amplify his ability to help others. The training center had been designed with input from the Chicago Fire Department, local hospitals, and emergency services across the region. It featured everything from basic life support training rooms to complex disaster simulation areas, where teams could practice coordinating large-scale emergency responses. Captain Williams approached Marcus as the ceremony concluded. "You know, we've already had inquiries from other cities about replicating this model. Jake's idea might spread far beyond Chicago." Marcus smiled at the thought. Jake's influence was growing in ways that neither of them could have imagined during their brief friendship. Inside the training center, Marcus found the memorial wall that honored Jake's service and sacrifice. The central plaque featured the photo of Jake in his military uniform, alongside a picture of him during his EMT training. Below the photos was an inscription that Marcus had written. Sergeant Jake Morrison served his country with honor and gave his life in service to others. His legacy lives on in every person trained in this facility and every life they save. He proved that heroism is not about how you die, but how you choose to live and help others live. The scholarship program that Jake had established had already helped 12 military veterans complete their emergency medical training. 3 of them were now working as EMTs with the Chicago Fire Department, carrying on Jake's mission of helping others in their darkest moments. Marcus had also used a portion of Jake's gift to establish the Rodriguez-Morrison Foundation, which provided equipment and training resources to understaffed emergency services in rural communities throughout Illinois. Elena had taken a leave of absence from her job to help manage the foundation, finding deep meaning in continuing Jake's work. During the training center's first month of operation, Marcus received a letter that reminded him powerfully of Jake's continuing influence. The letter came from Maria Santos, a former Army medic who had received one of Jake's scholarships. "Dear Mr. Rodriguez," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that last week I used the training I received at the Jake Morrison Center to save a child who had stopped breathing. As I performed CPR, I thought about Sergeant Morrison and how his sacrifice made my training possible. That little girl is alive today because Jake Morrison decided to help people even after his death." Stories like Maria's began arriving regularly. The training center's graduates were making a difference throughout the region, and many of them specifically requested to be assigned to the most challenging emergency calls, inspired by Jake's example of running toward danger when others ran away. 6 months later, Marcus was working a particularly difficult shift when he and Sarah responded to a multi-car accident on the interstate. As they treated the injured victims, Marcus noticed that one of the other EMT crews on scene was wearing Jake Morrison memorial patches on their uniforms. The lead EMT, a young man named David Reyes, approached Marcus during a break in the action. "Are you Marcus Rodriguez?" he asked. When Marcus nodded, David's face lit up. "I graduated from the Morrison Center last month. I've heard all about you and Sergeant Morrison. I just wanted to say thank you for creating that place. The training I received there probably saved 2 lives tonight." Marcus looked around the accident scene, watching teams of emergency responders working together to help the injured. Several of the EMTs and paramedics were graduates of the Morrison Center, and others had benefited from the equipment and resources that Jake's foundation provided. Jake would be proud, Marcus thought to himself, realizing that his friend's influence was now touching every emergency response in the city. That evening, Marcus sat in his backyard with Elena and Sophia, watching the sunset and reflecting on how much had changed since that cold February morning when he had crawled into the collapsed building to save a stranger. "Do you miss him?" Sophia asked, looking up from the picture book she was reading. Marcus considered the question carefully. He did miss Jake, their conversations, his determination to help others, his quiet strength. But he also felt Jake's presence in ways that transcended physical absence. "I miss talking to him," Marcus replied honestly, "but I don't feel like he's really gone. Every time someone graduates from his training center, every time one of his scholarship recipients saves a life, Jake is still here helping people." Elena smiled, understanding exactly what Marcus meant. He found a way to be in more places at once than he ever could have been when he was alive. As the months passed, Marcus continued his work as a paramedic while also serving as director of the Morrison Foundation. The training center expanded its programs to include specialized courses for handling disasters, terrorist attacks, and mass casualty events. Jake's initial gift had grown into a comprehensive network of emergency response resources that served communities throughout the Midwest. On the second anniversary of Jake's death, Marcus received a phone call that brought his friend's story full circle. The caller was Jennifer Morrison, Jake's cousin, who had been located by the military's Casualty Assistance Office. "I wanted to thank you for everything you've done to honor Jake's memory," she said. "I've been reading about the training center and the foundation. Jake would be amazed to see how far his vision has reached." She paused, and Marcus could hear the emotion in her voice. "I wanted you to know that our family has decided to continue Jake's work. We're establishing an endowment fund that will ensure the scholarship program continues permanently. Jake's legacy will never run out of resources." After the call ended, Marcus walked to the memorial garden behind the training center, where Jake's plaque overlooked the facility, where hundreds of future emergency responders would be trained. The garden had become a place where students came to reflect on the responsibility they were accepting when they chose careers in emergency services. As he stood there, Marcus thought about the words Jake had written in his final letter. "You reminded me that there are still people in the world who care about others, even people they don't know." Jake had taken that lesson and transformed it into something far greater than either of them had imagined. Through his careful planning and generous spirit, Jake had ensured that the act of caring about strangers would continue to spread throughout the community and beyond. The most remarkable thing, Marcus realized, was that Jake had accomplished all of this not through supernatural intervention or miraculous appearances, but through the simple human choice to use his resources and his death to help others live better lives. In the end, Jake Morrison had indeed returned, not as a ghost or spirit, but as a living force for good that would continue growing and helping others for generations to come. He had proven that the most powerful way to cheat death is to ensure that your life's work continues long after you're gone. As Marcus walked back toward the training center, he could hear the sounds of evening classes in session, where new students were learning to save lives using the resources Jake had provided. Jake Morrison was alive in every lesson taught, every life saved, and every person inspired to help others in their time of greatest need. The soldier had indeed returned in the most meaningful way possible.